It's weekly download time. It's weekly download time. It's time for the weekly download. It's download time. It's weekly download time. And now we're going to learn some stuff. Because it's download time. It's weekly download time. It's time for the weekly download. Download time. It's weekly download time. And now we're going to learn some stuff. All right, what's up, everybody? I'm here. I'm back from Costa Rica, and we're gonna do a triple header of weekly downloads because I missed last week, and I always like to be like one ahead. So we're gonna do a triple header of weekly downloads, which is pretty exciting. So I realized, well, there's a couple things. Like, I'm gonna do this one's gonna be about racks and just. This is just super important, and we need to cover this before we cover some of the other stuff that we're going to cover today. So this one is all about racks. It might seem a little basic to some of you, but if you don't understand racks, you're missing out on basically the #1 feature of any DAW that is just the best shit ever, okay? So we're going to do racks, and then I'm going to come back, and we're going to do some other stuff about movement and about a few other things. Okay, so racks is a really, really innovative feature in Ableton that many other DAWs have tried to copy. And there's this really cool, actually, if you don't have Ableton, what you can do is look up this thing, Mini Host Modular. And it's really cool. It's by ImageLine, who make FL Studio, aka Fruity Loops, before they realized how silly a name that is. And basically what it allows you to do is to put multiple plugins and multiple device chains inside of one group and then save them as a group. So this is basically like a diagram of what's going on inside of an Ableton rack, even though this is not Ableton. This is Mini Host Modular. So basically what happens in this particular plugin, right, what you've got is a signal coming in, and it's going to this piano roll editor, which is going to Harmor, and then the signal is being split off into a separate chain, which you can see here represented by this other path, and that's going into IL SliceX, which is another one of the ImageLine plugins, and that is going to, the MIDI coming in is going to Harmor and to SliceX. Both Harmor and SliceX are meeting up here in this effector chain and then going out, and then all of these SliceX ones are going into this effects pack and coming out. So you can see that it's actually, like, you know, it's a kind of complicated routing. You've got, what is that, 5 plugins, where there's one chain of 3 plugins that's going 1, 2, 3 like that, and then another chain of 2 plugins, and then they're summing at the output. So Ableton allows you to do that inside of Ableton, but there's 3 things to understand. There's chains, which are different plugins, which are arranged in series in a chain, and then you also have like, you can have as many parallel chains as you like, up to 127, but I've only ever used all 127 chains like once when I was making this like multi-filter plugin, but anyway, I'll tell you about that. But basically you can split your signal and then run it through a chain of plugins, and then you can have many chains that are then unified at the output stage. So that's what's happening in here. This input is being split into 2 chains, one of which is going through like this, through the piano roll to the Harmor to the effector to the output, and then a second chain which is going to SliceX to the effects pack and the output. And this Mini Host Modular, if you're using FL Studio or if you're using Logic or whatever, and you want to use some of the tricks that I show when I'm showing how to use racks, you can make your own racks using Mini Host Modular. And Mini Host Modular is free, and it runs in any DAW. So very, very, very cool. So just keep this in mind if you're not an Ableton person, but I am going to be using Ableton to show you about racks inside of Ableton. But yeah, that's Mini Host Modular, which is definitely a good thing to know about. I wish I knew about that a long time ago. Okay, so in Ableton, there's 3 kinds of racks. There's an instrument rack, a MIDI effect rack, and an audio effect rack. Okay, so first I'm just going to show you the instrument rack. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take this electric piano, right? I'm going to put that on there, and that's just like an electric piano now. Right? Very, very straightforward. And if you want to put it into a rack, you can right click and go group. Okay, so racks, before you had the parallel chains and everything, they were called groups. So that's why the command to put them into rack is called group. So you can either hit Command G, and if you're ever using any DAW, you can look on any DAW or any software really, anytime there's a keyboard shortcut, if you go in the menu, you'll see the keyboard shortcut in the menu, and that can be a really great, like if you find yourself using a feature a lot, whether it's in Word or Photoshop or whatever, be on the lookout for that. And you can see these menus. In these menus, there's the keyboard shortcut, so it's Shift Command I for capture and insert scene, or Command T for new audio track, or and then this one where you see that little symbol that looks kind of like a fancy T, it's basically representing that there's two paths and you're taking the alternate path. So that's the keyboard shortcut for Alt, right? So you can see Alt Command T, and then Shift is an arrow pointing up. So Shift and Alt are represented like that. But yeah, so you can use those to find out what your keyboard shortcuts are, and it's like that with any piece of software. That's just like a convention that software has. Oh yeah, excuse the sounds. There's some construction going downstairs on the new studio. They're putting in the window from the control room to the vocal booth. Very, very cool. It's exciting stuff. But yeah, so excuse the construction sounds. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to take this electric and we're going to put it into a group, which is a rack, okay? So I'm going to go put that into a rack, and now you can see there's these three little expandy bubbles here, right? In Ableton, anytime you see one of these darkened or lit bubbles, that means you can pop that section of the software open or closed to see what that, to see the various sub-functions. It's the same thing here. When you go over to the right, you can expand the I/O, which is the input and output routing. You can show or hide your sends and returns. You can show or hide the volume faders. This bottom one is track delay, which is not that useful. Sometimes it's useful, but not that useful. And then there's the crossfader. And also too, like let's say you have a clip, you can see here you can expand, you can hide and show the launch properties, hide and show the note properties, and hide and show the envelopes if you want to add some modulation to your clip. But that's just like a convention across Ableton. Okay, so in racks, the things that you can expand and hide are the macros, the chains, and the devices. Okay, so right now we have one device in one chain, and that device is electric. And when you play the MIDI, if I expand because there's different views in the chains, right? You can see the keys. If you press key, you can see now it'll show you in red which key I'm playing, right? And then you could make a you could make like a multiple instrument rack. So one of the kind of traditional uses for this that a lot of people would do is that you would have like let's say you're getting ready to go on stage, and you want to be able to play a bass line with your left hand and piano line with your right hand. Well, what you would do is you would make a key split, right? And you can do this in a lot of synths, but you can also do it in racks. So let's say here, I'll make this analog. This is going to be called bass. And I'm going to put a saw bass. Let's make sure my amp envelope is up. Okay, so now you can hear that that's going to the saw bass as well as to the electric. So that's going to the electric, and then you can mute and solo. So I'll solo the saw bass, and then I'll solo the electric, and then I'll play both of them. Right? So you can see that the two of them are together. So what you could do if you wanted to make a key split, let's say you want everything below C2 to be played in the bass and everything above C2 to be played on the keyboard. What you do is use these chain, they're kind of like chain ranges, or here, what are they called? Zone editor. Use the zone editor. Yeah, you'll see here on the left, I have this info view open. I often leave that open while I'm working so that it gives you the right terminology, but also so that you who are watching the stream can see what's going on. So in the zone editor, I'm going to make one zone that goes up to C2, and that zone is going to be to the bass, and then another zone that goes up C2 and above, and that's going to be in the keyboard. So watch what happens. So if I play, here, I'll go down an octave. Oh wait, here, that's a little low on the bass, so I'm going to transpose that up. So now you can see I have two instruments in the same rack and they're in a key split. Okay, so other ways you can split are velocity. So let's say you want to have I'll often use this. I'll make like velocity 127 be a different instrument because you have to like hit really hard to get 127 velocity. Like here, watch. We see when I'm playing. Like most of those velocities are kind of naturally below 127. You got to really like mean it to hit 127, right? So sometimes like I'll have a bass where there's like one LFO speed and then a separate copy of the instrument that's just on 127. So when I hit it hard, it like does some special thing. Right? So you can split by velocity. And then there's also this thing that's the chain selector. And these are zones that are, here, I'll specify these zones here. I'm going to make these guys take up the whole thing again. So now they're going to play at the same time. Right? So check it out. Now if I take this chain selector, let's say that I want to crossfade between the bass and the keyboard sound. Okay? So if I go like this, you can see that there's, it's the same thing with the key splits. You got this fat bar at the bottom which represents the zone where the input is active, and then you've got the top one where you can add a crossfade. Right? So if I go to the chain selector here, I'm going to make the electric fade in by manipulating the top bar, and then I'm going to make the bass fade out by manipulating the top bar on that bass zone. And now this little orange thing here, this is the chain selector, right? So I'm going to take this chain selector and I'm going to send it to macro 1. So if you right click and go macro 1, now this knob is going to move the chain selector. Right, so I can move this knob and you'll see that little orange chain selector icon moving left to right. And watch when I play the scale. Right, and you can kind of fade back and forth between the chains, and that is very, very useful. The chain selector is a really, really useful feature. Okay, so I'm going to unmap that from macro 1. So those are the different ways you can divide the zones in your chain view. And the chain view, once again, is accessed over here on the left where you can expand and collapse the devices or the chains. Okay, so you got key split and you can put fades on those. You've got velocity split and you can put fades on those, and you've got chain selector and you can put fades on those, and then you can also just hit hide if you don't want to see it because it takes up a lot of screen real estate, right? So I'll often be defaulting to hide, but I find I use the chain selector quite often, and the key split next most often, and then velocity I very rarely use. Okay, so now let's talk about macros. Okay, so macros are really useful, and you'll see macros in a lot of different synths and a lot of different a lot of different plugins will have macros. But the idea behind a macro is it's kind of like the mod wheel on a synthesizer. Like let's say that you're playing like a traditional kind of synth, right? And right, you would be playing your notes with your right hand and then adding some modulation using the mod wheel and the pitch bender with your left hand. And let's say you wanted to control just the filter on your synth. It's really kind of hard to accurately play the filter by just grabbing the filter knob and twisting it around, because you end up like sometimes you get value jumps in your parameter modulation, and sometimes like it's just really hard to hit it accurately, right? So what you would do is you would set your filter to the minimum value, and then you would tell the mod wheel to add to that value as you turn the mod wheel up. And it could be the same thing with, let's say you're using like a vibrato. That's one of the most common uses of the mod wheel would be a vibrato. You'd want the note to hold steady in pitch until you add some LFO to the pitch using the mod wheel, and the mod wheel would open that up. But part of the great thing about the mod wheel, in addition to being able to accurately specify your maximum and minimum values on your parameters, the mod wheel also allows you to control more than one parameter at once. So a typical use would be like, you know, you'd have the mod wheel add a little bit of LFO to the pitch to give you that like vibrato effect, like yeah, 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 ooh, 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 like that kind of effect. And then also it might open the filter a little bit. And once you have it controlling more than one parameter, that's essentially become a macro. And a macro, you know, like micro means small, macro means big, right? So a macro, it's like a big modulation. So let's get another analog over here, and I'm just going to go make this into here. Let's take this one and put it into a sine. So we have a sine sub, and then I'm going to take this one and set it up to here. So now we have. Okay, so now we have a saw wave here. I'll call this one saw up at the top. Name that chain saw, and then I'll name this one sine. Okay, so now let's say that I want to add some vibrato and add the filter opening up. So the first thing that I'm going to do is take this filter and I'm going to right click and go map to macro 1. Okay, and then that means that this knob now has a 1-to-1 relationship with the filter. So you can hear it opening and closing the filter here. I'll take the sine sub off. But you see how that sound, it becomes silent when the filter's all the way down. That might not necessarily be what you want. Usually you want to have like some sort of a fundamental frequency left when you have the filter all the way down. So you'd want to be able to control the range of that modulation. So when you want to control the range of the modulation and you want the relationship to be something other than 1-to-1, so right now like this knob is, you know, if I turn it all the way down, it's got nothing. If I turn it all the way up, it's got all the way up, and you can hear it. You can see that that knob has a 1-to-1 relationship, but we don't want that knob to have a 1-to-1 relationship. We want the minimum value of that knob to be probably somewhere around 150 hertz. So I'm going to want to go into the macro mapping editor. And if I click map, now I can see the macro mapping editor. And the macro mapping editor, this will tell you which macro is going where. So it says macro first, path, and then name. And if I name this, I'm going to call this mod 1. Now you can see that that name is going to, you know, the path is that device, and that, oh no, the name, sorry, that's the name of the parameter, I messed up. But now this macro mod 1 is going to saw, chain, analog device, and to the parameter filter 1 frequency. And now if I specify this minimum as 150, now when I move this up and down, it's, you can still hear some of the sound is coming through there. Right? And if you don't want it to go all the way up, you could bring the max down a little bit. See, now you don't get the bright top end of that sound. So you can specify the maximum and minimum, and then you can also add some other modulations. So I'm going to turn this LFO on. Right, and the typical speed of a vibrato LFO is usually around between about 8 cycles to 12 cycles per second. So cycles per second are called hertz. So I'm going to turn this knob up until I get to about 8 hertz, right, 8 or 9. And then I got to specify where this LFO is going, right? So now if I go to the oscillator, I can see there's this pitch mod LFO parameter. If I turn that up, here, I'll open the filter up a bit more. So here, let's hide the chains. So now you can see if I turn this up, see, that's too much. Right about there, that's typically where you'd want your vibrato to go to. So now if I right click on this LFO to pitch destination here, right, if I right click on that, I can also map that to macro 1. And then if I go into the mapping editor, I can specify minimum 0% modulation, and then maximum, I'd say 0.2, right? And now you can hear that if I have the macro all the way down, there is no modulation and no high end. And then if I turn that up, So you can see that that macro is doing both the pitch to LFO, creating a vibrato effect, and then also the filter modulation, right? And that I'm getting a very specific values out of that by using this macro mapping editor. So once again, you get to the macros, like here's the rack, I've collapsed the rack. You get to the macros by clicking this little macro icon. And then if you, and you get to the chains by clicking the chains icon, you get to the devices by clicking the device icon. Now if you have both the macro and the chains opened up, you have this little map icon, but you can also right click and it should say show or edit macro map. Oh wow, it doesn't show it unless you have it open. Okay. But yeah, you hit map, and then this is the macro mappings editor, and that's where you specify your maximum and minimum. So this is really, really useful, like really, really, really useful to be able to do this. And a lot of the time, let's say I just have a single parameter, like let's say I just want to edit the filter frequency. When you're drawing modulation, like in an envelope, for example, like let's go into our envelope here, it's nice to be able to just draw a simple ramp and know that when the value is down, that's one thing, and when it's up, that's another thing, and that those are accurately kind of specified, right? So even if I'm just doing a filter, like a lot of the time I'll go take a low pass filter and I'll put it on a thing, and rather than going in, like let's say I want to edit the modulation of this, if I right click and go, let's select that clip, if I right click and go show, come on, get that clip open, right click and go show modulation. Weird, it's not letting me show modulation for some reason. That's kind of annoying. But if let's say show automation, right? If I go like this, you can see I gotta like see what the value's at with those little data fields. It's a bit fussy and kind of annoying, right? It's nice to be able to just draw a ramp all the way from 0 to the top. So a lot of the time, rather than modulating the parameter directly, I will pop it into a rack by hitting Command G. I'll right click on the filter frequency and set it to a macro, and then I'll say 150 and up. And then I know that later when I do my modulation, I can just go from all the way down to all the way up. And it's a lot easier to write that automation because it's just like a simple ramp from minimum to maximum, right? So macros, they're good for creating a one-to-many modulation effect where you have one knob that does many things, and that's kind of what people traditionally think of macros as good for. But it's also really good just for accurately specifying a maximum and a minimum point on a ramp. Okay, so I'll often use it just to do that. And then once again, you hit the map and you specify you got the macro, the device, and the destination, and then you got the maximum and minimum. So a lot of this stuff, like, it seems really complicated to people, but if you properly understand it, there's not that many things going on. And once you understand these basic features of racks, you'll be able to download racks and open them up and see how people have programmed them and kind of reverse engineer and tweak racks. And if you're ever using any of my templates or anything, it's all been designed to be fairly easy to reverse engineer and like take apart and learn from. So, you know, definitely get your hands dirty. If you're ever curious what a rack does, just hit map and then, you know, check it out. Another thing to know too, let's say you want to change, let's say you want to make it so that, like here, sometimes, here, I'll make a clip here, so I'll see if I can show this. So sometimes, right, okay, so there's two kinds of like modulation. There's bipolar and unipolar. If you go into a MIDI parameter like a mod wheel always just goes from down to up. So you can only add to that type of modulation. But a pitch bend is a bipolar modulation because you can modulate the pitch bend up or you can modulate it down. Okay, so some things like pitch bend, Ableton knows that it's a bipolar automation, but some things like a mod wheel, you can only automate it up. And a lot of these device ones here, so now what happens when I click this? So if I go right here and go show modulation, you see how even though that knob can go down or up, right? Can go either down or up, I can only subtract here. I can't add to the maximum value. So here, I'll make like a little like LFO type thing. And for more on this, you can check out the weekly download, modulation versus automation. Actually here, if you want the rest of the weekly downloads, I normally have an ad up on the thing that says where you can get the rest of the weekly downloads, but I'm experimenting with taking the ad down. But if you do want to go get the weekly download, it's www.theweeklydownload.com. Okay, so that's theweeklydownload.com, and this is number 62. There's a lot of these things, and they're all really useful. So, and then, you know, if you support me, then I can spend more time making these things. So, yeah. But yeah, so anyway, that's the weekly download. Okay, so now you'll notice that you can only subtract from a modulation, right? So here, if I loop this and I'm just play this, watch what happens to the knob when I play this clip here. Okay, so you can see that modulation only goes up as high as the knob goes, because it's a unipolar modulation. If the knob is up higher, the modulation goes deeper, and if the knob goes down, the modulation only goes up that far. So sometimes, such as with certain audio effects, right, you want to be able to have it. Well, okay, here, let's start talking about audio effect racks, and I'll show you some really kind of cool stuff you can do with audio effect racks. So first I'm going to put a MIDI note in here. Let's get the notes view out. I'm just going to put a C3. So you can hear now what's going on here. I'll take this filter off. So you hear that? How it's going to the maximum point? Right? So let's say that you have a rack that you want to add an effect. For example, like the scratch rack, you want to add an effect, but you want the default position to be no effects. Okay, so let's say, here, let's put a beat repeat on, because a beat repeat is a really cool effect, but it is sometimes quite difficult to control. So I'm going to take a beat repeat and I'm going to put it into a group, right? And what the beat repeat does is it's going to take a small, what's called a buffer, which is like a little sample of the signal coming through, and it's going to repeat the buffer. So I'm going to open this up and I'm going to set it to insert mode. And I'm going to turn the pitch decay up a little bit so you can hear what's going on. And I'm going to turn it off and on. So you can hear that beat repeat comes on, and when it takes the buffer, because I have this pitch decay on, it's pitching each successive iteration of that buffer down slightly. So if I turn the pitch decay all the way up, it goes down quick. If I turn the pitch decay down, it'll go down slowly. Okay, so this is a cool effect. So I want to be able to turn this effect off and on, right, on the beat repeat. So I'm going to right click on the power button on the beat repeat, and I'm going to macro it to macro 1. Now watch what happens. When I turn this knob up, once I cross the 12 o'clock, which is I think 63 on the knob, it'll turn the beat repeat on. Right? That's great. But what happens if I don't want it on? If I want it to be a dry signal? Well, I can right click and go show modulation. But that means that to make it default to dry, I have to put a little piece of automation on every single clip, automating it down. That sucks. That's annoying, right? That's going to be a real pain in the ass. Every time I create a new MIDI clip, if I want it to be dry, I got to put it all the way down. What a pain in the ass, right? So we don't want that. We want it to default so that it's dry when the knob is all the way up. And then when we decide that we want that effect to punch in, that it's going to turn it on, okay? So I'm going to go back into the macro mapping editor. One way to accomplish this would be to right click and invert range, okay? So that means that the device is off until I go down past 63. Right? So let's do that, and then I'll automate like a little plug of automation at the end. So watch when it comes. Right? That's pretty cool. But you don't always want it to be 63. Sometimes you want it to just be on it all. So check it out. So here's how this works. Okay, this minimum position, that is representing when the device switches on, and below that the device is off, and then above that it's on. So check it out. If you right click and invert range, now it's going to be off unless you put it on. But check it out. If you put this up to 127, so that minimum is 127, maximum is 126, that means that anything below 127 is going to turn it on. Okay, so here I'll show you by making like a ramp. So you can see here, it'll snap on as soon as this is not 127. Right? Whereas if this is at 63, see, it'll hold for a bit and then it goes on. Right? So if you want it to just snap on, you want minimum 127, maximum 126. And if you want to do it the other way, you'd put minimum 0, maximum 1. And then that'll make it so that it turns on, or sorry, minimum 1, maximum 0, I think. Yeah, that's the other way. Right? So that makes it so that it goes dry at 0 if the minimum is 1 and the maximum is 0. And then this way, if you put minimum 127, maximum 126, that means that the maximum value of the parameter is dry. Okay, so that might have seemed a little bit complicated, but just try it out, and that's how you make it so that you have a knob that is off until you put anything but the maximum value. Okay, and that's really useful because let's say we do it the way where it's 1 and 0, so that it's off at the bottom, right? You still have this problem where you got to automate it down, right? And then actually here, let's put that off. Oh wait, hang on, I might have messed up here just a second. Oh yeah, 1 and 0, that's why. Right? Then you still have that problem where it's at the where you have to automate it down all the time. So you want it to be dry up at the top and then automate it down. So this is better. So 127 minimum, 126 is maximum. And then you can go into your modulation. And I'm just going to add a little bit, like so here, anything other than the maximum. So this is the same as this, right? And then you can make like a long one. So here, let's bring that in a little. Right, so that'll have the same effect as this. Because anything that's not maximum adds the effect. Okay, so this is really good for what I call punch-in effects. And punch-in effects are effects that are just momentary effects, and they're either just like on or off. Okay, so that's a punch-in effect. So if you want to make a punch-in, you would have it set to minimum 127, max 126, and then anything except for 127 turns the effect on. And that is much more useful than the way where the effect has to be down all the time because of these unipolar modulations. Because not everything, it's only like pitch bend that gets treated as a bipolar modulation, right? Every one of these other controllers, you can see these are all unipolar except for the pitch bend. That's the only time you get a bipolar one. Okay. All right, so that's a little bit about Audio Effect Racks. And Audio Effect Racks, in many of the other weekly downloads, I go into some of the ways that you can use parallel processing in the Audio Effect Racks and have like, you know, let's say here, let's get a drum loop. Okay, let's use this drum loop. Okay, so I'm going to show you another really useful way to use the chains. Okay, so let's say I want to just compress the living shit out of this drum loop. Like I want to get that really aggressive, overcompressed sound, right? If I bring down the threshold and bring the ratio up, I will get that sound, but at what cost? Okay, check it out. See here, maybe I'll get another loop that has less going on, and you'll be able to hear the effect a little more clearly. Drum loop. Yeah, let's use this one.
Sounds good.
Okay, so here you can see compressor off. Right, and then if I turn this on, see, you can hear the compressor kind of like pumping and stuff, and it's ruining the dynamics of the sound. So let's say that I want to have that really aggressive overcompressed sound, but I don't want to ruin the dynamics of the sound. What I can do is put this into a group, right? And then I'll right click and create a new chain with nothing on it that's going to be called dry, and then this one will be called comp. And now if we take this overcompressed signal and mix it into the dry signal, we're accomplishing parallel compression. Right? And then you can get that really aggressive compressed sound without really like ruining the dynamics of the sound. Let's try, I'll show you another kind of cool thing you can do.
You know what you want to do with that, right?
Let's get a vocal.
A banging donk on it.
Yeah, let's put a banging donk on it.
I'll be there for bye. Go.
Actually, let's get let's see. Actually, let's look at Pella, because you really want like an acapella for this. Oh, it's being annoying. Okay. Come on. Surely Pella turns up something. Vocal, singing. Okay. Okay, this is kind of, here, you know what I'll do? This is my Live 8 library, so it is not as well tended as my Live 10 library. So let's just get an acapella. Yeah, here, let's get the acapella for Arm Eel. Okay, great. So I think this was 150 BPM if I recall. And then let's go bring this out to here.
With the West Coast sound.
Actually, this is already pretty compressed. Let's get the Irma Vep acapella. Say Irma Vep. Where's the vocals? Only Irma Vep. Let's say, okay, hang on. Irma Voc. No, it's the vocal mix. Oh, geez, sorry about this, guys. User library, maybe in my clips, my remix parts. Oh yeah, remix parts. There's probably one in here. Okay, Otoro, is that gonna have the vocals? Let's see, Otoro. This is being annoying. Okay, just a minute. Yeah, here we go. Here's acapella. Oh, I spelt it with one C, like a dum-dum.
This to a painter's.
Okay, cool. So let's say you have a vocal, and here, let's bring this down to 98 BPM, and you want to get that breathy top end on the vocal that makes everything so clear.
Music is a canvas to a painter's hands. It's an uncarved block of sculptor's rock. An elephant.
right? Let's say you want to get that breathy, sexy top end on your vocal. What you can do is do the parallel compression trick. Okay, I'll show you how to do that. So you take the compressor, put it on, group it, right, and make it extremely compressed so I can turn the ratio up.
Music is a canvas to a painter's hands. It's an uncarved block of sculptor's rock.
Okay, and then right click, make a new chain that is the dry chain, and then your compressor chain is going to be wet. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is after I compress the crap out of it, I'm going to EQ out the bass and boost the highs. And this is something I normally never do, but because this isn't a wet dry, you can get away with kind of fairly abusive EQ and compressive practices. But now check it out. Watch what happens to the highs when you do this.
Music is a canvas to a painter's hands. It's an uncarved block of sculptor's rock. An LFO to make a baseline walk. Life's a mixed media.
You're mixing in just this.
Music is a canvas to a painter's hands. It's an uncarved block of sculptor's rock. An LFO.
And that's how you get that like super breathy top end that you hear in like a pop vocal that makes it so you can hear like every fucking lyric in the song. You would do that by doing parallel compression and then just having the extremely compressed highs mix in against the dry signal. So here's just the dry signal.
Music is a canvas to a painter's hands. It's an uncarved block of sculptor's rock. An LFO to make a baseline walk. Life's a mix.
And you can do that anytime you want to get really fucking crisp highs out of a sound. You can do that. So that's kind of like some of the things that you do with parallel chains. Now you'll see here in the chain selector you just have chain and hide, and that's because you don't have velocity and MIDI note information coming into the rack, okay? But you still have your macros and you still have your chains, okay? The last weekly download, I covered MIDI effect racks in pretty vigorous detail. It's basically the same shit as audio effect racks, so you know it's pretty much the same thing. The only other rack that's really different is a drum rack. Okay, and a drum rack. If you go into the drum rack and look here, I'll clear all this. I made a funky drum rack default preset. Okay, so let's see. Let's just grab like some drum samples. Okay, so there's our bass drum. Watch what happens when I bring this bass drum in. And let's see, let's get a snare. Okay, so I've got a bass drum and a snare in. And what this is, you can see the same familiar macros, right? You can map anything to the macro. You've got the chains and the devices, but you've got a few more different parameters here. When you see when I expand the chains, you can see receive and play, okay? So receive means, because the drum rack is designed so that each MIDI note has its own chain. So you can put a bunch of these different sounds in here. Let's see, let's get a tom. Right, and you can see that this chain is going to be triggered by this note. This chain's going to be triggered by this note. This chain's going to be triggered by this note. And this chain's going to be triggered by this note. Right? Fairly self-explanatory. So that's receive means what note does it receive. And if I change receive, watch what happens to this drum when I change the receive. You can see that it's moving around the drum rack, right? That's what that receive parameter does. It says it's basically which pad is that drum sound on. So you can see it's moving around the drum rack. And you can either have it set to receive any individual note, or you can have it set to all notes, and then it just becomes like it's in a normal MIDI rack, okay? So then this play parameter, this is gonna change what note comes out. So right now, they're all set to default to C3 because you don't want the sound to pitch around. You want it to just stay at the pitch, right? So when I hit that, and then watch what happens when I put this, like let's say down to C an octave below, it's essentially pitching the sound down. So you can change, so I'm still hitting C1 again and again and again. It's just changing what note is being sent to the sampler in that chain. All right. Sometimes, so I'll put that back to C3. So that's where we want it. It's just on C3. So C3 is the like normal note, essentially. Right. Sometimes, like let's say that you have, let's say you have a sample from a record. So let's say a loop. I'll put a drum. Yeah, here it is. This will be good. So I'll put this one here, and then another one. So let's say I want to have 2 bass notes. So that'll be 1 bass note, and then this one I want it to be up. Right? So now I can have that bass note be part of the drum beat. Right? That's pretty cool to be able to do that. But what happens when you press them both at the same time? You get this weird, awkward chord, okay? I'm not trying to make a chord. So actually here, I'll turn warp off on both of these. That sounds awkward. So what happens, like, or let's say you're chopping up a record and you have a record inside the drum rack and you want to have different slices in the song. If you play them both at the same time, you're going to have 2 copies of the song playing on top of each other, and it's going to be like too much, right? So what you want to do is you want to have these things, it's called choking, where one sound mutes the other sound, and they're allowed to play individually, but not at the same time. And that's exactly what we want for these 2 bass sounds. So if I set them to a choke group, you have up to 16 of these choke groups. So if I set these both to 16, I can play one or the other, but not both. And it's just going to play whatever the last one triggered is. You see, it refuses to let them play at the same time. So that's really, really useful if you're like, because the drum rack is not just for drums. It's totally not just for drums. It's a really good way to cut up sounds. And, you know, once you have like if you have a record and you have a push, for example, you can hit a pad and then like change your cue points on the push and stuff. It's really, really useful. So it's not just for drums, but there often are times when you want the sounds to not play at the same time as other sounds. So like, let's say 2 kick drums at the same time is often bad. An open and closed hi-hat at the same time will ruin the illusion that it's one hi-hat sound. Or 2 bass sounds at like right on top of each other, it'll be too much, right? So that's where you'd use the choke groups, okay? Now, you'll notice here also that there's these send and return tracks inside of the drum rack, right? That's really cool. So I'm gonna create a return chain, and I'm gonna call this one side chain. Okay, and I want to send the 2 basses to this side chain, right? So I'm going to turn send up, or actually here, I'm going to put them in a group first. I'll put these 2. If for some reason in Live 9 they fix this in Live 10, but you see how this audio 2 parameter is grayed out? Like this is kind of like a copy of the audio from audio 2 parameters inside of here. Like so you can go like this. But they don't let you do that here for some reason. They make you use the annoying little drum rack editor. I don't know why. Or wait, here, let's go into the drum rack. Yeah, they make you use it here. So audio 2, you can't send anything to audio 2. For some reason, it's available on the side chain, but not on these individual sounds. So here, actually, I'm going to make these 2 same color so we can see more clearly. So I want to have these guys go audio 2, send A, but it won't let me until for some fucking reason you group them. Then once they're in the group, if I go to the drum rack, then I can specify in the input output, I can specify to the side chain. And now these 2 will go to this one, which I'm going to make white, and then I'm going to put a compressor on it. And then the kick is going to sidechain the bass. Watch. Okay, so turn the sidechain on, and I can tell it to take it from drum rack and then bass drum. I can say post effects and take a fat scoop out of it. And now watch, you'll see. Right, and that kick is taking a dip out of it. Right, so I'll turn that way up turn the ratio way up, and turn the release time up so you can hear it even better. So now you have side chaining inside the drum rack. How fucking cool is that? But you have to put them into a group and do it. But then check this out. This is a weird hack that I figured out. Watch this. If I ungroup those chains, it will retain the mapping. So that's a way you can cheat and like hack your way around that limitation inside of drum racks in Live 9. Lord knows why that's the case. They fixed it in Live 10, but in Live 9, that's why, which is just weird. But yeah, so you can use that. You can, like the traditional use of the sends inside of the drum rack would be adding like a reverb and a delay. But I often use it for side chaining, and it's really like if you're making like a sound pack style drum rack where it's got drum sounds, but then also melodic sounds, having side chaining inside the drum rack is really cool. But yeah, so that's drum racks. So that's probably the most complicated type of drum rack. If you are a Producer Dojo member, here I'll show you. Here, I'm going to go bring up the dojo page. Okay, so if you're a Producer Dojo member, go to myproducerdj.club, as I'm sure you know if you're a member, and that will take you inside the members area. And I'm just going to make this a little smaller so that my screenshots aren't right on top of it. Okay, so if you go to the library, right, you can see here in the weekly download, the weekly downloads are all here. There's so many of them. And you can go scroll up and down in the weekly download section and see all of the different ones. But you can also go and start here. There's a bunch of, this is like, you know, where you go if you're first logging in. So there's a bunch of these things that help you to kind of get your head together. And then there's this one, which is all site content organized by category. And this is a list that has everything, well, mostly everything on the site organized. And if you go to the drums section, all right, here's a tutorial about 128s, and then here's this drum rack workshop, okay? This is a whole workshop just about drum racks. It's an hour long. It's got all the different pad techniques, choke groups, all these different ways pads can interact, all this different stuff. And you go here and you can see, like, when you open it up, these videos are
Okay,
sick.
let's talk about...
You can see they're really sick videos. And then, like, you know, I've got all the notes and everything for different sections. But yeah, this video,
things that are a
this is
bit
probably
more
my
advanced.
best. This is probably
now, one of my favorites.
Probably my most useful workshop if you're a drum rack user. So it's not just for making sound packs, but that can also be found if you go to the library and then you just scroll down here and go to page 2. You can see the drum rack workshop here. So if you're into drum racks, which I highly recommend you get into drum racks, go get the drum rack workshop, okay? And then if you just want the drum workshop, if you go to producerdj.market, this is the market where you can just buy individual products, and you can buy it just as a solo product there. But you should, it's part of the weekly download too. So if you're a weekly download member, you can get it by going here into the weekly download, and then I put it like pretty much right away in the weekly download because it's really useful. Yeah, weekly download number 4 is the drum rack workshop. So definitely go get the drum rack workshop. All right, so that is a tour of racks and all of the different features of racks. I'm going to go check and see if there's any questions, and then we're going to come back and we're going to do another weekly download because it's a double header this week, well, probably a triple header. So I'm going to go see what's up here. Okay. There's no mod wheel on an APC 40. It's not that kind of controller. Landon Tay says down with fairies. I like fairies, especially the gay kind. Yeah, okay, cool. All right, so that's all. There's not really any more questions on Facebook. I'm going to check on YouTube here. is there a way to add an aftertouch option like for push? No, but you can MIDI map things to aftertouch. You can make a macro and then map it to aftertouch. Because MIDI mapping and macro mapping are two different things. MIDI mapping refers to how your controller interfaces with the parameters of Ableton, and macro mapping refers to how the parameters on the macro interface with the parameters on the devices inside. So you could have a macro parameter that is controlled by aftertouch. Good question. Okay. All right, cool. So I think that's it. I think that's it for this weekly download. I'm going to take a break, and then I'm going to come right back. And, Eric Sewer, that is a freshly shaven Jacob, who used to be very beardy, but he got a new job at a fancy restaurant, and he doesn't want to leave hairs in people's food, so he's now shaven.
I keep all the hair in my pockets, by the way.
Yeah, he keeps all the hair in his pockets for later. Yeah. Okay, cool. All right, and then, big up to everyone in Seattle and in Columbus, Ohio. I'm really looking forward to the gigs. Seattle is tomorrow, Friday, and then Columbus, Ohio is Saturday. So, yeah, if you're a Dojo member, meet up, too, hit me up, because we're having a Producer Dojo meetup. So hit me up, mgmt@illgates.com, or get me. But yeah, we're having a big Producer Dojo dinner in Seattle tomorrow, so that's pretty exciting. All right, so I'm going to take a little break, and then I'm going to come back, and we're going to start talking about movement. But yeah, I realized that I couldn't talk about movement without showing people how to macro map the rack macros, because it'll just be confusing. So we're going to talk about movement in just a bit. All right. Lots of love, everybody. Thanks for watching. Big up to everyone who supports me at the Producer Dojo and everyone who supports me at the Weekly Download. I'll be right back, and then we're going to talk about movement. Peace.